And welcome. It is Monday, January 18th. I had to double check there. This is BKP Politics. I'm obviously not BKP. I'm Richie Stone in for Brian this morning. And it is a chilly morning here in beautiful North Georgia, LJ, Georgia, coming at you from the studio. It's been a while since we've seen anyone in here. Still looks as good as always. It is also Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, one of the sacred holidays here in our country. I want to get into that. It's something that growing up where I grew up on the east side of Atlanta and seeing a lot of the places that I would later learn about as a American history major in college that really put a lot into perspective, and I can't stress enough just how important of a man he was to our country and how much his life and his actions in life changed our country for the better, and then how his tragic death really changed things even more. I mean, it's hard to even put into words how much someone through life can make an impact, but even through death can make an even bigger impact. And those examples are few and far between in our country when a flame is extinguished while it's still burning strong. But wanted to start off, big game last night between the two old guys. I know a lot of you probably weren't watching. A lot of you probably were. Tom Brady and Drew Brees, two 40-plus-year-old men, I believe. Brady is 43, playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Drew Brees, 42 years old. Drew Brees announcing his retirement after the loss as an Atlanta Falcons fan. I will not miss him. But no, in all seriousness, wonderful career. You know, some people, sports media is a lot like the news media, the political news media, in the sense that they love narratives, they love building people up, they love tearing people down. You can find, you know, you can compare him to a guy like Matt Ryan in Atlanta, and Brees, of course, has a Super Bowl, but their statistics are really on par, and when Ryan retires, he's probably going to be past Drew Brees in most every major statistical category, assuming he doesn't get injured. And it just goes to show you how these media narratives, you know, they pick winners and losers, and with Ryan, it's always, you know, he can't win the big one. Obviously, he lost a big one to the aforementioned Tom Brady. And Brees only won it once, but that guy's been eliminated in the playoffs every other year just about, in the years they make it. And they always have high expectations. But for whatever reason, he's still a guy that they never question, well, hey, why can't he win the big one more often? But I will say this, those New Orleans folks, and this is the reason I talk about this, is directed at a friend of mine who I know is watching. The New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons are obviously huge NFL rivals. And when I was a kid, the first game my dad took me to at the Georgia Dome, he was a season ticket holder and his friend couldn't go. And he decided that he would take me for the first time. And that was when I saw my first drunken fist fight between people from New Orleans and some people from Atlanta. And I was like, oh, wow, so that's the NFL, huh? Obviously, come to find out that wasn't the norm, but these New Orleans folks loved that Super Bowl that I really don't like mentioning. I've blocked it out of my mind, but the quarterback for the Patriots that day, Tom Brady, came back on the Falcons and won, and it was nice to see, although the stakes weren't nearly as high, it was nice to see him have a comeback victory in New Orleans to crush their hopes of a Drew Brees Super Bowl on his way out the door. So now that that's out of the way, lots going on in the news here locally and nationally and in the state. We're going to get into all of that. First, a little bit about Dr. King, though. And I know a lot of folks have their own stories. Obviously, his "I Have a Dream" speech is what we hear most often, which is an outstanding speech. The messaging, his oratory skills, and then you look at that crowd that day on the National Mall in Washington, and just all the people there, and it really gives you a good grasp on what the man meant to everyone, and his ability to draw such a crowd, and was really representative of the movement, the civil rights movement at the time in the 1960s, and a lot of that, that is his lasting legacy. That's what we see most often. But for me, when I got to college, you grow up in obviously every student of my generation and the generations going forward, we know who the man is. We know the bread and butter of it and of that era, and we all learn what it meant. And of course, we have the holiday all throughout growing up in school. And it wasn't really until college when I started. I majored in history with a focus on American history, and I've always been fascinated by that era of the 1960s, whether it was the Vietnam War or the end of Eisenhower into Kennedy and his assassination into Johnson, and Forrest Gump playing at Alabama, becoming an All-American. That was a very fascinating time to me. And one of the first things that really opened my eyes to the more in-depth of it was the letter from a Birmingham jail. And the fact that people have a moral responsibility to break unjust laws and take direct action rather than waiting potentially forever for justice to come through the courts. Responding to being referred to as an outsider, and I'm quoting here, King writes, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." A little background, it was the Birmingham campaign, April of 1963, coordinated marches and sit-ins against racism and racial segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. The nonviolent campaign was coordinated by the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights and King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. On April 10th, Judge W.A. Jenkins issued a blanket injunction against parading, demonstrating, boycotting, trespassing, and picketing. Leaders of the campaign announced they would disobey the ruling. On April 12th, King was arrested, along with Ralph David Abernathy, another Atlanta civil rights legend, and Fred Shuttlesworth. And other marches, while thousands of African Americans dressed for Good Friday looked on. And of course, I believe the late John Lewis was there also. And that's the reference to the term good trouble that has been mentioned a lot in the wake of Congressman Lewis's death. But it's something that the context is very important. And that quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And the fact that a judge put out an order that wouldn't let anyone, and the direct quote here, parading, demonstrating, boycotting, trespassing, and picketing. Well, that pretty much covers all of your right to protest there. And obviously it was unconstitutional, and history remembers things much differently than they were at the time as far as eliminating that right to protest, eliminating that right to march in the streets. And that's something that today, at least in theory, we saw throughout the summer after the death of George Floyd that that's no longer an issue. It is celebrated to have your right to protest, your right to march. But when it comes to free speech, and I know it's crazy that I even have to say this, but it's very relevant today, and I want to dance around this lightly because there is a sense right now where we're seeing this, and a lot of free speech advocates, ACLU folks who are, the American Center, ACLU is hardly a right-wing organization. We all know this, correct? But even they draw the line on certain issues when it comes to free speech, because something that we hold so dear, and you can see with this judge here in the Birmingham case, is when you start regulating what speech can or can't be said, or what demonstrations can and cannot be allowed to demonstrate, then you've lost the whole thing. Because then the question isn't, is there free speech? Then the question is, who is the arbiter of free speech? Who gets to decide the free speech? And we've seen something in 2020 and now into 2021 where that problem is upon us. And frankly, it's something that I don't really understand, and I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. I mean, I do understand certain aspects, but I don't understand why more people aren't outraged. And here's what I mean. It's not just the fact that we have an army in Washington, D.C. right now, and people are encouraged not to even go there or protest because, we all know in 2016 there were fires, there were streets shut down, not by authorities, but by protesters. And then we had the Women's March a couple of days later that had hundreds of thousands there, and it was celebrated. But now, because of one event, that right is no longer there, and it's scary to think that just because of the bad actions of a few, that a right like that can be taken away. And it's not even really about the Capitol either. I mean, it is, of course. I mean, this is just a continuation, but you can go back even further with COVID. I think COVID's where a lot of this starts, where people, the right to freedom of assembly is also very much in the First Amendment. And we all know how that has been curtailed. And I go back to an interview that with Tucker Carlson did with Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey. Tucker, a.k.a. Chatsworth Osborne IV. He was talking to Governor Murphy about lockdowns and shutdowns of businesses and restrictions on crowd sizes. This was probably in the spring. I think Brian even did a segment here on the show. And the question he asked Governor Murphy was, why, or what clause in the Constitution, I'm paraphrasing here, what clause in the Constitution gave you the right to do this? And Governor Murphy was a bit stumped, and he looked at Tucker and said, well, I didn't consult the Constitution. It's not about the Constitution, Tucker, which was very telling. And then he also gave the excuse, well, judges have held it up, and we hear that a lot. Well, judges say it's okay. But when you start chipping away, and we see this with the Second Amendment, but that's a conversation for another day, we see this notion of, well, it's not your freedom of speech. It's, just a little bit. You just can't. There's a virus. It's a pandemic, you dummy. You can't be around people. Put your mask on. Shut up. Okay, well, that's fine. And then you see in Michigan where, people are protesting the lockdowns, and they go to the Capitol, which is a public building, and they're called terrible names. They were called domestic terrorists for going in there with guns, the optics of which I'll admit aren't ideal, and it's not something that I think I would do. But no one was harmed, no one was shot, they were clean, everything looked fine afterward. But it was like the worst thing ever. There's a famous picture of that nurse stopping traffic when people were doing ride-by protests, and the nurse stopped traffic with his scrubs on and had his hand out like this, and it was heroic, nothing short of heroic. This was early May, late April, as tensions were boiling over about COVID lockdowns, as businesses were losing money and going out of business. Government aid was not nearly enough to what they were used to. Meanwhile, liquor stores, marijuana shops, and the like were allowed to stay open. So what am I building up to? Well, after Memorial Day weekend into June, we had massive protests after the death of George Floyd that turned into riots, looting, and massive destruction of property. I know Emily's back there. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, Emily. Did Brian ever show the picture of the reporter saying it's a mostly peaceful protest where it's like on fire in the back? Yeah, I figured he probably did. That was a layup for Brian, wasn't it? But that's one of those things where the right to protest in that sense was celebrated. Mostly peaceful protest. Mostly peaceful. That's what we heard over and over again. Like, I thought that was going to be the name of the new Washington football team, ironically enough. But the Washington Mostly Peaceful Protesters, that would have had a nice ring to it. But they did things that went beyond a peaceful protest, and not everyone was lumped in. They said, oh, well, it's a few bad actors. It's not everyone. You know, the thing we hear the most, they say the most important thing is that they have that right. And I agree, 100,000,000%. Couldn't agree more, especially when it comes to things like racial injustice. That's something that should be protested within reason as far as knowing the facts of a case. And, you know, I'm not going to litigate that here. But as it relates to this quote, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Now, that can be interpreted broadly. In this instance, it was about desegregation and the resistance in the South, particularly in Alabama at the time, to resist desegregation. But when you also look at Judge Jenkins, a blanket injunction against parading, demonstrating, boycotting, trespassing, and picketing, I can guarantee you if supporters of Governor Wallace in Alabama wanted to protest something, Judge Jenkins probably wouldn't have issued a blanket injunction. And that's the crux of this, is it was wrong to deny Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and the whole rest of them their right to speak out. And when they did, when you see the videos of the violence from the police, it's very disheartening. It's one of the worst scenes I've ever seen. I was forced to watch it in school all the way through, and it's something Americans should see, because then you realize the difference of what was happening then and what is happening now, and what's perceived to be happening now, what we're being told is happening now when it comes to protests of left-leaning causes. And it also builds up to that point about when you start chipping away at speech, when you start chipping away at rights, whether it's the Fourth Amendment, as we saw with the president's team in his transition in 2016, where the Fourth Amendment was clearly violated without any punishment, or whether it's the Second Amendment, which, like I said, is another conversation. I think we're all well versed on that, or whether it's the 10th Amendment and the right of the states to govern based on things that aren't explicitly directed in the Constitution. Well, we have several things where the federal government has come in and said otherwise. That's another wonky conversation for another time. But the First Amendment, there's a reason why it's first. And when you get to this idea that happened back then, it's something that really irks me. And what irks me is not that they're doing as much. What irks me is not so much that they're doing it, is that people aren't standing up. And that was the problem when the civil rights movement was going on, is that not enough people stood up. And that's why these demonstrations were held, because when people don't stand up and allow it to go on, it goes on. But then when you do the demonstrations, people take notice. They have to take notice. When you get into the good trouble, people must take notice. And that's what happened. Enough pressure had been placed on everyone, especially in the South, to where Congress acted. And now when you apply that to today, and this is my point here, I'll wrap up. I know we got to go to break soon. What we're seeing now, when you look at the double standard of the celebration of protest that the media agrees with versus protests they don't agree with. And that is how we get to that dangerous place where the First Amendment gets eroded, because we're talking now that it's not about freedom of speech right now. It's about who is the arbiter of speech, who gets to decide what speech you can have, what demonstrations you can make, what protests you can have. When we start asking that question, and that becomes the first question, is, well, can I say this? Because I don't want to run afoul of the master, if you will, the person who gets to decide who can say what. That's when we're in trouble. And that's something that the overriding message here with Dr. King, someone who is an American patriot, that's where it lies for me with his Birmingham situation, and the line of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But we're going to take a break. I'm Richie Stone. I'm in for BKP. This is BKP Politics, live from beautiful LJ, Georgia. We'll be back right after this.
Hello, my name is Chad Watkins. I'm the manager at Larry's Body Shop. We are a family-owned and operated business and have been serving the North Georgia area since 1978. We are located at 1216 Progress Road in LJ, Georgia. Our shop specializes in collision repair, and we work with all major insurance companies. Larry's Body Shop is ICAR Gold, the highest role of training recognized by the collision repair industry. It is estimated that only 10% of collision shops meet these standards. Our shop consists of state-of-the-art equipment such as laser measurement system, down-drive spray booth, spot and MIG welding equipment. All of our paints are mixed on site so that we can guarantee your paint to match every time. I know that having an accident can be a stressful event. We take pride in making sure our customers are satisfied with the repair of their vehicles. Our waiting area is clean and comfortable with free Wi-Fi and refreshing beverages. So if you're in an accident, stop by and see us at Larry's Body Shop.
Circuit World has 9-piece living room packages at incredible prices. Get this stylish sofa and love seat, 3 tables, 2 lamps, 43-inch 4K TV, and stand, all for only $1699.99 or $129.99 a month. Or get this 9-piece living room and reclining sofa and reclining love seat, now only $1999.99 or $149.99 a month. These packages are amazing. Stop in today at one of our 5 locations and get the furniture you've always wanted at Circuit World.
North Georgia Diamond is your source for diamonds in North Georgia.
Ace is your healthful place for paint and home goods, tools, outdoor living, and lawn equipment. But did you know Ace Hardware of Blue Ridge is a little bit more? We have hunting rifles and accessories for your next hunting trip. We have Amish furniture imported directly from Ohio. And we have Ace Custom Woodworks for all your custom wood project needs, from cabinets to artwork. Ace Hardware of Blue Ridge. We have your new house in stock.
What you gonna do with all that junk?
Welcome back. We're nearing the bottom of the hour here. It is 8:28, coming at you live from Ellijay, Georgia. I'm Richie Stone. This is BKP Politics on FYNTV. Hashtag turn off the news. Did I get that one right? Turn off network news. That's what it is. Yeah, obviously, that doesn't make sense. Why would we turn off the news if this is a news show? Turn off the network news. Turn on FYNTV.com. I believe for now you can still find it on YouTube, Facebook, all of your social media platforms, except of course Parler. That one's no longer with us. RIP. Which kind of goes along with what we talked about there in that opening segment. It is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. He would have been in his 90s. I can't remember exactly how old, but definitely one of the most influential Georgians to ever live. And can't say enough about that. So we've got some other stuff coming up. I was fortunate enough to have a nice conversation with Mr. Jake Evans, who is among other things, I mean, this guy's got a resume a mile long. He is chairman of the Georgia Ethics Commission. He is chairman of the Republican National Lawyers Association, Georgia chapter. He does some other stuff, the Republican Election Confidence Task Force. I say it in the interview, and we clear it all up, so we'll just wait till then. But that's coming up at the top of the 9 o'clock hour. Jake and I really get into a conversation about the state of play here, both nationally and in state politics, as we move forward with everything that has gone on since November, and really where the GOP stands. There's certainly two camps right now in Georgia, and it's the kind of thing that that's very frustrating. As someone, in full disclosure, I'm the chairman of the Republican Party of Gilmer County up here, and I'm involved in state politics and local politics, of course. And it's something that we see now, and it's really the Democrats' dream, is Republican on Republican infighting. And it, breaks one of Ronald Reagan's great commandments, but it's a narrative building here where, frankly, it's frustrating, because when you look at the results in November and what happened afterward, as far as criticism of what went wrong, very close election, within a few thousand votes, as we all know. And, there's a lot of thoughts on that. We won't get into all of them, but let's just pretend and go with the narrative here that everything was above board and that we lost. Okay. A lot of the criticism, and I've seen it from establishment types, many of whom are dear friends, but they're part of what I call the Capitol crowd. They're, a lot of them may be from rural Georgia originally, but they love the Atlanta style, the Atlanta lifestyle. They live in Atlanta, work at the Capitol, work for folks in office, official offices, and campaign offices. And what I hear a lot and see a lot on social media and whatnot is this whole notion that, well, we should have been out knocking doors instead of having boat parades and caravans. We got outworked. When in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. It is so arrogant to see this throughout November and December leading up to the runoff election. It was so arrogant to see people that I respect say that, well, the grassroots didn't do enough. You didn't door knock. You didn't do the necessary things to win. You were having these silly little caravans. Well, I'll tell you, I can guarantee you that every single candidate in the state of Georgia, running statewide, locally, dog catcher, whatever, would love to have 1,000 cars right up the interstate with flags with their name on it. I can guarantee you that, first off. So this whole idea that, oh, your boat parade and your car caravan was silly and pointless because that doesn't vote. Well, it may not vote, but it's a hell of an indication where the people are when they take time out of their day to do something like that. That's probably the silliest statement I've heard. But then to double down on that and say, well, you didn't do the necessary things. They say it as if we weren't door knocking, as if we weren't reaching out to voters. Couldn't be further from the truth. Here in Gilmer County alone, our record had been 10,800 thereabouts in the 2016 election. Republican votes, that is. We set a goal of 12,000 voters based on the voter list we had, and not only did we hit 12,000, we got 13,000, and we got almost halfway to 14,000. I think it was like 13,600. That's outstanding. That's something that's never happened here. In the 2 years between the governor's race and the presidential race, we added a little over 2,000, almost 3,000 Republican voters. So we turned out. The notion that we didn't is absurd. But that was something that we kept hearing. Folks on drive home radio, folks out of Atlanta, folks very much in the establishment who wanted to push this notion that we just didn't do what we needed to do, that everything was wrong and that we were all to blame. And that blame, the blame game on the grassroots, is not a good idea. Never a good idea. And there was this whole, we need to move on immediately. There's no need to look into anything, no need to look into any irregularities from that crowd. And that was the wrong thing. Even if you just pay it lip service and say we need to look into it, that might have helped you out with the base. But what do? They doubled down. They started insulting the base openly. Things I can't say, but it was very degrading, and I'll just keep it at that. And like I said, a lot of these folks are my friends, and you know, when you lose an election, you know, you say things you probably don't mean to your own people, and you know, always give the benefit of the doubt. But the notion that we didn't do enough is absolutely absurd, and the notion that our efforts weren't enough is absolutely insane. I mean, this is an election that here, you know, speaking for my county, but I know it's the same way throughout the 9th and the 14th district, we did a lot to prepare for this. 2 years worth. Really, when the governor, when 2018, when Governor Kemp was elected, when that cycle ended, we were on to it. Started raising money, started planning, prepping, how to, you know, set up our office, started getting more integrated with the district and the state parties. So to say that it was a lack of effort and to immediately point the proverbial gun at the people who got you there was the wrong move. And not a lot of people are saying this. I felt the need that I needed to bring this up because it's not being said enough that when we get to the January runoff with our Senate races, which yet again a very close race, we saw a drop-off in North Georgia and in other rural areas. I mean, we saw it across the board, but what jumps off the page is what happened in North Georgia. And immediately, let me backtrack here. Not only were these folks blaming the grassroots and your voters who had boat parades and car caravans, even though they, like I said, they would love nothing more than to have that for their candidates. These folks started setting up a narrative, and I heard it more than once. Well, when we lose in January, it'll be the fault of these people because they're questioning an election. They're asking questions. Shut up. Quit asking questions. Put your mask on and shut up. It was essentially what they were saying as far as questions about what happened. 93% of a military vote in Fulton County was a little odd. I will say that. But hey, I'm just asking a question or making an observation here. Not making any accusations about what happened. I'm just pointing out that seems odd for someone to get 93%. That's like what Democrats get in Washington, D.C. That's about the only place I ever know of. So for military to get 93% in one county is a little odd. Things like that, right? Asking questions. That's what we elect our leaders to do. But nope. Because those questions were asked, we must blame the president. We must blame the Congress people of North Georgia. We must blame the Trump voter themselves. We had these people on radio, one very popular one in Atlanta, who immediately started referring to Trump voters. He said that the week of the election. He said, "You Trump voters are smelly people." I thought that was a little odd. And he would love to say that he donated more money than anyone. A lot of these Trump supporters didn't donate money. There was no fraud. And then it became, well, there's fraud in every election. And then it became, there's fraud in every election, not enough to change it. Shut up. You're going to cost us the election. And that's what they decided on as a narrative, was that your support for President Trump is going to cost us the election. And they set up this narrative before the election even happened, over and over again, by saying, oh, the president and his team are telling you not to vote. Well, why would you even repeat that? Why would you say something that may make people not actually vote? Why would you be so arrogant and derogatory toward these people to perhaps make them not vote? It's astounding to me because a lot of Republicans in Georgia, especially the establishment types, they know damn well who the base is. They know where their bread is buttered. They know that if North Georgia doesn't turn out, they're in trouble. Yet they insulted them all throughout the holidays, all throughout, between early November and January 1st. It was a blame game. Hey, the rule of politics is, number one, you can't alienate your voters. Duh. That should be number one, right? When you alienate your voters, when you alienate your base, you're in deep trouble. And I felt awful for our candidates because they were in a catch-22. When you have conservative media, mainstream conservative media here in the state, along with our mainstream papers, saying one thing about it and saying, oh, they're a bunch of baseless conspiracy theorists, yada, yada, yada. And then the candidates come talk to the base and they're outraged. Rightly so. But the constant degradation, I can't tell you when the door knocking was going on for this Senate runoff, I can't tell you how many people told our door knockers that the Republicans had turned their back. And I can't tell you how many of them mentioned a radio talk show host by name and how he had insulted them and thinking that he was actually representative of the party because he wanted to tell everyone how much money he had given and how he wrote speeches for the president, and they thought he was in. They thought he was probably more in than he portrays himself to be. They don't know that the guy's actually not who he says he is. But how many of these people, you'd be shocked at how many people told our door knockers by name a certain conservative radio host, not Rush Limbaugh, who insulted them on air in the days following the election, called them smelly conspiracy theorists, called them, I don't know, I don't want to give the guy too much credit, but it's by focusing too much on him, but it's the kind of thing that you got to wonder if they look in the mirror and think, well, what was my role in this? Was it a good idea for me to call all these people stupid and then think they were just going to go out and vote? And another point, in January, we turned out 91% of our November rate. So our November vote was a record. Our January vote would have also been a record had it been in November. Nearly 13,000 voters, Republican voters. I don't know what else you can ask for as far as turnout and runoff elections. To think that you get 91% of your voters to come back for a runoff on an election that is basically occurring during the holidays is unheard of. And if you'd have told someone, hey, you're going to get 91% plus in your county in the January runoff, if someone had told me that before Thanksgiving, I would have said that's outstanding. We thought we were going to be lucky to get 10 because that's usually how runoffs work. But there wasn't a person in the state that didn't know this election was going on. I mean, we didn't have any Christmas commercials this year because they were all ads about the election. So when you're dealing with such tight margins, anything and everything can make the difference. So the Republican establishment in the state can say, oh, well, thanks to the president, we lost because it's such a short margin. Or we can say, well, thanks to you guys, we lost because they didn't show up for you. Or, DeKalb County turnout was just a pinch more than it was in, let's say, Fannin County or Lumpkin County. And that's what did it. When elections are that close, anything's the difference and everything lost it. And that's something we all have to remember when the blame game gets played. It's not like we got beat in a landslide. It was very, very close. So instead of insulting your voters and knowing that your voters are big-time supporters of the president, knowing that the president is the reason why a lot of these Republican candidates have done well in the last 4 years here in Georgia, maybe, just maybe, even though he lost, it probably wasn't a good idea to immediately turn your back on him. And it probably wasn't a good idea to insult the very people that put you in office, because I can tell you we have another cycle coming up. And my biggest fear is that fracture that has only been exploited by our mainstream Republicans. It's only been exploited by them. That fracture is going to be a big problem, and hopefully it'll be sorted out in a primary race, as things like this usually are. And I think we're going to have several primaries for that matter, as you all well know. But I fear that we're going to be in a scenario where whoever comes out ahead in those primaries, the loser supporters are going to stay home. Because that's something in American politics, it all kind of ties in where we talked about Dr. King earlier in the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, where the right to vote is sacred. We all know this. However, there is also the right not to vote. And that's something that loses popularity over the years. You have advocates to say, oh, every single person should vote. We need 99% turnout. Well, of course, Democrats say that because then they'd win every time. But the notion of the right not to vote is just as powerful as the right to vote. It goes back to freedom of will, freedom to dictate your own destiny. and the fact that no one can tell you what you have to do. And that's what we saw here. I don't think it had anything to do with enthusiasm. Sure, there's apathy when you lose, but what we saw in January wasn't because we didn't make voter contact. I would be willing to say we made more voter contacts in the runoff than we did in the general election because we had so many people here. And shout out to the NRSC staff from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell's team. We had him here in up the 515 corridor, and they were outstanding. John Dye, Emily White, and others. We had more contacts than we did, as I said, before January than we did November. So it wasn't an issue of people not knowing. Plus, as I said before, you couldn't turn on your TV, watch a YouTube video, get on Facebook, or turn on the radio without hearing an ad for the election. So there was no one in this state who didn't know there was an election January 5th. It's not a matter of grassroots organizing and making contacts. That was covered well. No, what we saw in January was a protest vote, a protest non-vote. And it wasn't because people thought their vote didn't count. That's another thing. It wasn't because people said, oh, well, my vote doesn't count anyway. We've heard a lot of that. And sure, there are some true believers on that notion, but Brian, host of the show, this is his chair, he went to the Trump rally in Dalton, and every single person he asked, except maybe one, I think, because they were a felon, said they're going to vote. Some didn't think their vote counted. Some thought their vote did count. Every single one of them said, we're still going to vote. Most already had by then. So it wasn't a matter of not thinking your vote was going to count or not. People still did it anyway. I mean, I know people who had many questions about the overall tally in the state. But that didn't mean that they weren't going to vote. Because, I mean, if you don't do that, then what's the thing? No. What happened with those who didn't turn out, I think they wanted to send a message. They wanted to send a message to those who were nothing short of cruel to them after the election, telling them they didn't do anything right, telling them that they're no longer, essentially telling them they're no longer needed within the party. Then you couple that with the events of January 6th, which all the facts have not come out on that yet. And despite this is when you can really tell who the people were who were never on board with Trump at all. When that stuff that happened on January 6th up in D.C., they were quick to say he's got to go. Damn the last week and a half. Before any facts came out. People who were typically rather level-headed were quick to jump on this whole he's got to go thing. And now we found out over the weekend that there were Antifa and BLM protesters there. I think 2 or 3 have already been arrested. Google it. It's starting to come into the mainstream. There was a man from Utah arrested who was one of the leaders, and then there's a young man, I believe TMZ reported, a young man who is the son of a Brooklyn judge was also arrested, and we don't know the political affiliations of the young man who was the son of a Brooklyn judge, but we can use context clues in the fact that he was the son of a judge in Brooklyn and probably guess where they lean politically. That's just a guess, a BKP guess. But the folks that turn their back, and this is the larger point here of this segment of the state party and the state of things, these same establishment folks are calling for the resignation of our state party chairman. The lines have been drawn. And I don't know that they realize, we've seen this with the Trump phenomenon over and over again, where people are ready to write his political obituary. And they vastly underestimate his popularity with the people. And I have a feeling that's happening again. Unfortunately, the split within the party, with the way things have changed in Georgia, you got to have the whole coalition together. They got to be there. And it's something that Jake and I talk about in this upcoming segment that we recorded yesterday. And he's very much someone who is in tune with what goes on as far as the metropolitan Republicans go. He's not one of the people who I've talked about. I want to get that clear too. He's a very practical guy whose family has a lot of ties to the state party and understands the coalition. But when we think about where we are right now and how things are divided in the state, it's not so much a matter of support for Trump versus well, let me think about how the best way to put this. The arrogance and the looking down upon of a lot of the rural voters, especially in North Georgia, did way more damage to our state party than anything the president said after the election. And that's how I feel. And you'll see the perspective that Jake has coming up after this, and he's someone I respect and admire very much, and he makes some very valid points about this too. But moving forward, the coalition has to be together, and this is going to be the longest 2-year primary of our lives. I mean, it's going to feel like primary season here pretty soon, especially as this session goes on at the General Assembly. There's a lot of things that, whether they happen or whether they don't happen, that will dictate where this fracture goes and whether things can be unified. And the final point being that we've seen now who was never actually with the president, who just faked it. And we're going to have the choice and the decision to pick them or to pick someone else come primary season next year. And it's going to be, I'm afraid it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think the lines have been drawn, and I fear that it's going to get personal. We've already seen that, especially in the General Assembly, whether it's committee assignments being taken away or people demanding resignations or what have you. But it's going to get worse before it gets better, and it's going to get awfully personal. And that's something that I thought I wouldn't see as far as losing track of what the common goal here is to win a general election. But as we go forward, buckle up, and it's something that's going to have to play out, and we'll let the cards fall where they may. And first, of course, we have to get through this session. We have to see what happens with election reform, and we have to see who gets on board with it and who thinks that it's all just one big conspiracy theory. So I'm Richie Stone. We're nearing the top of the hour here in beautiful Ellijay, Georgia. I'm filling in for BKP. He's off on business. He will be back tomorrow, though. But for now, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to take a little bit longer of a commercial break to get this interview fired up at my conversation with the great Jake Evans when we come back.
North Georgia Diamond is your source for diamonds in North Georgia.
In 1981, Reed Nicholson began selling tires out of an old barn in Mineral Bluff. Little did he know that he had just laid the groundwork for the most trusted names in automotive services in the Blue Ridge area. In 1997, Nicholson Tire Center became what it is today, holding the same values of faith, family, and great customer service. 2 locations to serve you, and the Blue Ridge location is currently expanding to offer fast service and the largest U-Haul provider in Georgia. Nicholson Tire Center, Blue Ridge, and Mineral Bluff.
Circuit World has complete queen bedroom packages at amazing prices. Get this queen bed, dresser and mirror, 1 nightstand, bedding set, and free 32-inch TV, all for only $1799.99 or $129.99 a month. Or get this complete queen bedroom set and sleep in style, also for only $1799.99 or $129.99 a month. What an incredible deal! Stop in today at one of our 5 locations and get the furniture you've always wanted at Circuit World.
Why is Truck Month bigger at Days Chevrolet in Jasper? It's our massive Days discounts, like up to $10,000 off new Silverado crew cabs, or up to $7,000 off new Chevy Equinox. Bigger selection, bigger savings. Truck Month is just plain bigger at Days Chevrolet in Jasper, where new Chevy trucks always cost less. Days Chevrolet, Days gets it done. Find new roads.
Hello, my name is Chad Watkins. I'm the manager at Larry's Body Shop. We are a family-owned and operated business and have been serving the North Georgia area since 1978. We are located at 1216 Progress Road in LOJ, Georgia. Our shop specializes in collision repair and we work with all major insurance companies. Larry's Body Shop is ICAR Gold, the highest role of training recognized by the collision repair industry. It is estimated that only 10% of collision shops meet these standards. Our shop consists of state-of-the-art equipment such as laser measurement system, down-drive spray booth, spot and MIG welding equipment. All of our paints are mixed on-site so that we can guarantee your paint to match every time. I know that having an accident can be a stressful event. We take pride in making sure our customers are satisfied with the repair of their vehicles. Our waiting area is clean and comfortable with free Wi-Fi and refreshing beverages. So if you're in an accident, stop by and see us at Larry's Body Shop.
Circuit World has 9-piece living room packages at incredible prices. Get this stylish sofa and love seat, 3 tables, 2 lamps, 43-inch 4K TV, and stand, all for only $1699.99 or $129.99 a month. Or get this 9-piece living room and reclining sofa and reclining love seat, now only $1999.99 or $149.99 a month. These packages are amazing. Stop in today at one of our 5 locations and get the furniture you've always wanted at Circuit World.
Georgia Diamond is your source for diamonds in North Georgia.
Ace is your healthful place for paint and home goods, tools, outdoor living, and lawn equipment. But did you know Ace Hardware of Blue Ridge is a little bit more? We have hunting rifles and accessories for your next hunting trip. We have Amish furniture imported directly from Ohio. And we have Ace Custom Woodworks for all your custom wood project needs, from cabinets to artwork. Ace Hardware of Blue Ridge, we have your new house in stock.
What you gonna do with all that junk?
Welcome back to BKP Politics. I'm Brian's guest host, Richie Stone, easy for me to say. Brian is off tending to a business matter. He will be back tomorrow. I'm thrilled to be filling in. It is Monday, January 18th, also Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. As we talked earlier in the open, it really is an important day to sit back and reflect on the words of such a patriotic American such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how his words ring true, especially today, given all that's going on. And speaking of all that's going on, I'm now joined by a good friend of mine. He is chairman of the Georgia Ethics Commission, chairman of the Republican National Lawyers Association, or the Georgia chapter, rather, and also chairs the Georgia GOP Election Confidence Task Force. But he really needs no introduction. I'm talking, of course, of Jake Evans. Jake, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Richie. It's good to be on. I enjoy always talking to you, and especially speaking up there in North Georgia today. I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, and I really wanted to have you on. You and I talk off the record. We check in here and there and talk a lot. We're both history guys and talk a lot about precedent and cyclical natures of history and what we're seeing, and also of what's going on now and how what precedents are set and really kind of where we are state of the union wise. And, really just wanted to have you on and continue a conversation that we had back when you were chairman of the Atlanta Young Republicans. I sat in on a panel that you hosted about the rural and urban divide within the GOP. It's something you kind of saw coming. And if you would you explain a little bit about what we did that evening?
Yeah, sure. Sure. No, there's no doubt about the fact that here in Georgia as a state is just changing demographically. And what we currently have is we used to have the North Atlanta suburbs, which were heavy red, the Tom Rice's district, Newt Gingrich's district, and they have slowly turned not as red as they used to be. And in fact, many of the counties, Cobb County has turned blue, Gwinnett County has turned blue. And so the Georgia GOP has really had to lean on the rural areas. But that leaning on has exposed in some ways the Northern Arc, because the Northern Arc is obviously a bit more moderate. They're more focused on fiscal issues, not quite as much on social issues. So what the Georgia GOP has to do is they've got to find a way to unify the two. And I think in many ways that is focusing on the true conservative principles. But what's interesting long-term is going to be how do we swallow the post-Trump era? I think many Republican candidates have leaned on Trump to just drive up turnout. And if you look at the January 5th Senate runoffs, both Senator Loeffler and Perdue, they didn't have Donald Trump to lean on at the top of the ticket to drive up turnout. So the Georgia GOP has got to find a way to kind of bridge that gap where we can unify the rural, very dependable Republican voter, and also bring in and engage the former, and I think they still are Republicans, but the Republican voters in North Atlanta Metro, because the reality is those voters in the Northern Arc turned on the GOP hard. I mean, we're talking about a 20-point swing from 2012, 2016, and now. And so it's something that the GOP really got to focus on.
And really, 2 points here. It's almost that we're back to where we started after Obama's reelection in 2012. A lot of people talk about the autopsy. I think they loved saying that about where the GOP went wrong, and then Trump kind of came out of nowhere and created this entirely different coalition and really just turned out voters that I think, frankly, a lot of the GOP folks didn't even know about. But the other point being too, though, that it's not a new coalition. I mean, when you go back historically, obviously Georgia was owned by the Democratic Party for a century and a half, and when Republicans finally started making headway in the state, that was the coalition, was the North Georgia mountain area, your suburban area, and parts of middle Georgia that have historical ties to the party. Any thoughts on that?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, at any time you have a leadership gap at the top, and listen, this happened in 2012. I mean, whenever you have a big vacuum, you're always going to have a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change. And that's what the Republicans are going to have 2020 going for. I mean, Donald Trump was no longer going to be the sitting Republican president. He obviously is going to have a lot of sway. But Richie, you're exactly right. I mean, he engaged. If you go back to 2016, no one was giving, especially Trump, but even the Republicans, a chance. I mean, 2016 was supposed to be Hillary Clinton's year. She was the one that was supposed to win easily. And Trump invigorated and really electrified a base and built a coalition really the GOP should be very thankful for. And that's something that we have to continue. And those blue-collar, hardworking voters that were sick and tired of American mediocrity, which happened under the Obama years, when Obama really prioritized every country other than America, it seemed like to me. Trump said enough is enough. We're going to go America first, and that really electrified. But focusing on what we have here in Georgia, the reality is that as continue, and one of my big focuses has been from the start, we need to focus on rural Georgia instead of just focusing on bringing in jobs from Amazon and bringing in jobs from all these tech giants that don't share Georgia values, and that's the entertainment industry. I mean, I'm all for all that. The reality is individuals are coming from states that have high taxes that really are insolvent almost, and they're coming into the well-managed state, bringing their values into the state, which is going to if we have what happened on January 5th happen in 2022, when all of our statewide elections are up, this state can tip on its head very quickly. So it's something that has to be taken seriously. And the reality of what we saw January 5th is that we have to have North Georgia Republicans engaged and out to vote. Because if the GOP does not have North Georgia Republicans engaged and out to vote, lose. And that January 5th election showed that more than any election we've had in a while. So all of the folks up in North Georgia, we depend on you. I mean, the Georgia GOP depends on you. And so we need to.
And that's part one of my conversation with Jake. We're going to take a quick break here to make sure we get some bills paid. I'm Richie Stone filling in for BKP. When we come back, we're going to play the second half of that, and then we're going to close out the show with another close friend of mine, Reese Sanford, someone you all know from election night coverage here and through numerous interviews. He's our unofficial, official money man, and we're going to talk a little bit about what to expect economically with the new administration. So I'm really looking forward to that. We're going to be doing that live after the bottom of the hour. This time just flies by here on a Monday morning, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. I'm Richie Stone in for BKP. We'll be right back with the second half of that interview.
North Georgia Diamond is your source for diamonds in North Georgia.
In 1981, Reed Nicholson began selling tires out of an old barn in Mineral Bluff. Little did he know that he had just laid the groundwork for the most trusted names in automotive services in the Blue Ridge area. In 1997, Nicholson Tire Center became what it is today, holding the same values of faith, family, and great customer service. 2 locations to serve you, and the Blue Ridge location is currently expanding to offer fast service and the largest U-Haul provider in Georgia. Nicholson Tire Center, Blue Ridge, and Mineral Bluff.
Circuit World has complete queen bedroom packages at amazing prices. Get this queen bed, dresser and mirror, 1 nightstand, bedding set, and free 32-inch TV, all for only $1799.99 or $129.99 a month. Or get this complete queen bedroom set and sleep in style, also for only $1799.99 or $129.99 a month. What an incredible deal! Stop in today at one of our 5 locations and get the furniture you've always wanted at Circuit World.
Why is Truck Month bigger at Days Chevrolet in Jasper? It's our massive Days discounts, like up to $10,000 off new Silverado crew cabs, or up to $7,000 off new Chevy Equinox. Bigger selection, bigger savings. Truck Month is just plain bigger at Days Chevrolet in Jasper, where new Chevy trucks always cost less. Days Chevrolet. Days gets it done. Find new roads.
Welcome back to BKP Politics. I'm Richie Stone filling in for Brian this morning. He is off on business. He will be back tomorrow, though. Do not fear. It is 9/19 here on Monday, January the 18th, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. We're going to go ahead and jump back here to the second half of my interview with the great Jake Evans.
As far as engagement goes, though, do you sense that there's a fracture forming with the wing of the party? And I don't even know that it's fair to say establishment, because I think pre-Trump, most of these folks would argue they're hardcore conservatives. But it almost is, whether it's class or whether it's just lifestyle culture, I sense here that there's a fracture forming where a lot of people are very quick to blame, say, the 9th and the 14th district for not turning out, whereas I hear on the ground here, well, they turned their backs on the president immediately, and they're acting like they didn't even want him to be president. They almost were happy that he lost. And that's something I sense, especially with the results on January 5th. I think there was some messaging that I think the candidates, and this is no criticism on them, I mean, it was a really tough race, and I think they did well given the circumstances. Obviously, losing was not the ultimate goal. But I think there was some messaging issues is which one do we cater to? Which crowd do we cater to get back out and win?
No, Richie, it's a brilliant point. And what happens is over time, whenever you have power, is you inevitably have cannibalism. And I don't want to say what your point is necessary cannibalism, but what happens is there's a lot of different players trying to maintain positions of power. In a way, you're going to have some conflicts. And I think we'll see this happen to the Democrats very soon, where you got the AOC, ultra-left progressives, trying to hijack Biden trying to pull it back towards the middle. But your point is spot on, which is that the president has carried us forward for the past 4 years. He has, overall, Republicans in the state back in November did very, very well. I mean, we picked up 10 seats in the House. We almost maintained control of the Senate, and really that came down to kind of the aberrational circumstances here in Georgia with the election issues. But the reality is the president unveiled serious issues in our election integrity system, which require election reform. I mean, that has to be going into the General Assembly session right now coming up. The number one issue needs to be clearing up the election reform, because the reality is what happened back in November, we had more mail-in and absentee ballots cast in that election than we've ever had. COVID brought out more people voting that way. And yeah, a lot of my Democratic friends get mad when I say this, but this is an empirical fact. Mail-in and absentee ballots are the least secure way to vote, period. You're not going in person showing a voter ID. They're not verifying your face whenever you do it. You are sending out a ballot, and the only way you verify the authenticity of that person's identity is a signature. And these signatures just are not a reliable way that we can verify that this person is who they say they are. And it is very, very rife for fraud. It's rife for fraud not just whenever someone's signing and sending it in. It's rife for fraud because the election officials, whenever they're going through it, can easily manipulate what's on the ballot. They can erase it. They can bubble in a blank. One of the leading ways to do it is just, let's say, for example, they're on the top of the ticket, an individual didn't vote for Biden or Trump for whatever reason. And you've got a poll worker, they're going through the adjudication process, and it looks like a little mark on the Biden spot. And they say, oh, this person meant to vote for Biden, I'm going to bubble in. How do you prove that's fraud? I mean, Richie, you can't prove that's fraud. I mean, the only way you prove it's fraud is if someone's standing over that person's shoulder and they're able to do it. So it's very, very difficult. And so the number one issue going into this session needs to be, and it will be, Governor Kemp's going to do it, Ralston's going to do it, is creating, and I'm not saying there doesn't need to be any absentee voting. Some people say only no excuse absentee voting, and I'm not necessarily objectionable to that, because a lot of Republicans also do vote absentee, and a lot of Democrats vote absentee. But we have to increase the security, either voter identification with absentee voting, and all that is requiring the same amount of verification that you vote in person as when you vote via absentee ballot, or providing an additional required information, either your driver's number, your social security number, your voter identification number, because we have got to provide more security so that the public can have confidence in the election. And I'm not going to sit here right now and say anyone's cheating one way or another, but I'm going to say that in order for either party to have confidence that elections are properly done, we need to ensure that either party or individual's ability to cheat is greatly, greatly limited. So that needs to be a number one.
You know, in my meetings with my crowd as chairman of the county party, we get a lot of questions, especially at our meeting after the election, was, well, who are the people deciding? Just a quick example. One person had heard a story about a ballot where that Senate election that had almost 20 candidates, we'll call it 20.
21.
Right. And people had selected more than one person, and they had heard a story that, well, they would just assume the favored candidate got it. And they said, well, how does this legal? And what I keep saying to them is, listen, this is all based on having honest people working at the polls. I mean, that is what this whole system is based on. And that's why it was very difficult to reassure them that here where we are, we have honest people. They're all above board. It's a small number of votes relative to one of the metro counties. So it's just by nature, that's more transparent because it's not as many people working. And, especially in the aftermath of the November election, there was a lot of folks who were questioning everything, which I love because it's great to hear folks doing that. I mean, I can think back to March, our last meeting before COVID. We had a demonstration of the new machines. They'd been going around the state fair, that sort of thing, and they were doing it in our county. And we had a pretty good turnout, but everybody, no one really asked the questions. And I know they, after the election, they're sitting back thinking, man, I remember when we did the demonstration, I bet, there's so many questions I should have asked then. And so the engagement's a good thing. People are engaged. It's suddenly very, very important to them, almost in the sense that the Democrats were after 2018 when that became their rallying cry. And, a lot of that led to I think the overhaul of the system anyway, but, that'll come up, I'm sure, in future elections, the decisions why, to, and how. But I guess to jump off that point, though, is how do we fix it to a point where we still maintain the sovereignty of these county boards and letting them do things? It's almost like a school system argument, or, state, federal, and local.
Yeah, well, no, it's a great question. I mean, Georgia is very interesting because we have 159 counties. The only state in the United States that has more counties than Georgia is Texas. And Texas obviously is much bigger geographically as compared to Georgia. In Georgia, each of the counties have their own elections board, and each of the election board independently executes the elections or administers the elections. Every year, every election, it's the same couple of counties that have major, major issues. Again, this isn't a partisan point. This is an objective fact. Fulton County, DeKalb County, Clayton County, both in the November election and the January election, DeKalb County around 8 p.m. suddenly stops counting ballots. That's just, I'm not saying they did anything wrong or whatever. That's just suspicious. Why would you stop counting ballots at around 8 p.m. both times? I mean, so what's got to happen, and this is another piece of legislation that's being considered, and that is allowing the Secretary of State's office to intervene whenever you have counties that are consistently not meeting expectations. And again, this ensures that we can have some type of uniformity, but at the end of the day, we want each of these election boards to independently administer the elections. So I don't think that's a bad thing, but the point that you hit on earlier, I think, is another big point, which is The poll workers that are working these polls, many of them are not what you would call completely impartial, nonpartisans. I know many partisans that are working both Fulton, Clayton, and DeKalb. And I'm not suggesting they did anything wrong, but I am suggesting that there are many, many people that may be reasonable that someone could have done wrong. And we want to limit that. We want to make the process as mechanistic as we can, that we can have confidence that people are, even if they wanted to act inappropriately, didn't have the ability to act inappropriately. And that's the reason why these election reforms are so important, is because we've got to increase public confidence in the electoral system. Otherwise, we're going to have a repeat of what we already had. And my last point that I'll make, these are not issues. The argument that, oh, the Republicans lost and now they want to come and change the election law, that's not true. These have been issues for a long period of time. These have been issues for decades. Two things happened that really, really brought to light why these issues need to be addressed so bad. COVID. Second, we had the Republicans didn't win, which made them really, really, at a micro level, look and break down the issues and amplify them. And so it's not that suddenly they become an issue and they're never an issue before. They've always been an issue. It's just these circumstances really, really enhanced why we have to fix them as soon as we possibly can.
Like what I said about our voters here in the county suddenly being way more interested in how these things work and how the machines work. And I tell you this, to kind of piggyback off that, I think it's a brilliant point, and without question it's needed. But what worries me now is it seems as if everything that happened internally within Georgia, I think everyone wasn't, I don't think everyone was ready to be in the national spotlight the way we were with, everything that happened. And really a lot of it's gone off the rails. I mean, I think the sides, the political sides, and a lot of them are Republicans versus Republicans, to the point where I worry a lot of this will get derailed. A lot of the common sense questions and reforms that need to be made that the people overwhelmingly support. I'm worried that the political, the byproduct of everything else that happened and the line that's been drawn in the sand, I'm worried that that's going to derail anything getting done, because people are going to be afraid to, get in the middle of it, frankly.
Yeah. Well, listen, to that, and I think that's a fair point. I say to each of the listeners, call your representative, call your state senator, call your state house rep, call your congressman. This is the time that these issues have been brought to light. These are serious issues that require reform. And this is the opportunity that the GOP has. And we have control. We have a very, very big, huge election for the state in 2022. We need to use the momentum that we have that came off of when we highlighted all these issues. And this needs to be the session that this election reform goes through. And that's on each of the constituents. As we saw January 5th, North Georgia has a lot of power in this state. Without North Georgia, statewide GOP candidates don't win. We need North Georgia, and we need to step up on them to call the representatives to make sure that this issue gets addressed, because now's the time that it needs to.
And then do you worry, and I'll let you run here soon, I know you're on a tight schedule, but do you worry though that the Trump era, if you will, although short, I mean, heck, seems like it was a decade, even though it was only 5 years. Do you worry that now the GOP is back where it was following Obama's reelection in 2012, where a lot of efforts were in the works to reach out to other voters and minority groups and really kind of embrace identity politics more? Or is it a net positive that, believe it or not, this doesn't get said much, but Trump actually increased with minorities at a greater rate than anybody, I think, since Dwight Eisenhower. And, has the damage been done there, or is it not? I don't think it's nearly as bad as what we're seeing on TV. I think for him to lose by such a small margin in those states, and then the Republicans win everywhere else up and down the ticket, that they're actually in a better place than people would think.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a great question. My first point is Trump lost because of one factor, and that's COVID. He was faced, what modern president has faced in a re-election year, a global pandemic? None. I mean, it was the ultimate catch-22. The Democrats had the ultimate gift from God, which was, okay, he either opens back the economy, which he made the right decision doing that, because we can't shut down the economy forever, and starve people of their well-being, starve people of their economic prosperity, starve people of their happiness, or he had the perpetual lockdown, which has shown not to work. If you look at California, New York, they have some of the highest cases in the country, yet they're on the most stringent lockdown that there exists. But or he had that, which, okay, maybe the numbers are a little lower, but you're starving people of everything.
They were prepared to hit him on both anyway.
Bingo. It didn't matter what he did. They had an opportunity. Now, and you look at it, the fact is Joe Biden ran the most lethargic campaign possibly ever. And that's the reason why. The reason why is Joe Biden didn't win the election. All he had to be is an empty suit and show up and just spout out about COVID-19 and everything else. And he knew that was going to put him in a good position to win. And that's eventually what happened. So, you know, I don't necessarily think Trump lost this. I think he was presented with circumstances that very, very few presidents could overcome. Not in this era, not with the media control they have. But there is no doubt about the fact that the GOP is at a crossroads right now, because Trump built a coalition that hasn't existed on the GOP. When's the last time the GOP won Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio? I mean, it hasn't happened in a very, very long time. So he's reinvigorated a different type of voter that we've got to hold on to. But the reality is he's no longer at the top. And so we have to move forward in a way to where we can unite the North Atlanta type of suburban voter with our rock solid, dependable, reliable North Georgia voter and reinvigorate that coalition. Because if we do that, statewide, the GOP is unstoppable.
Right. I think to the point you mentioned earlier that the Democrats have had a common enemy over the last 4 years that has united them. And we're really about to see the fractious nature of what's going on over there, because, yeah, like you said, Biden was an empty suit, and that's all he had to be, just not be Trump and stay quiet.
Yep.
That's one thing when you're running. It's another thing when you're governing, and it's almost like we could see a reverse of that, to where they're not nearly as prepared to govern as they'd let you think. So I think that's a big reason why we're going to see an impeachment trial in the Senate, because I don't think they were ready to even, I don't think they had any plans to take over the majority in the Senate. But we'll leave that there. It's something I want to continue later on. I hope to stay in touch, and apologize in advance for any lagging or anything, folks. This is not on Jake, it's on us, the weak internet. The weak internet up here. But Jake, thank you so much for joining us. Really means a lot.
You got it, Richie. I enjoyed it, buddy, and thank you.
All right, have a good one.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Chad Watkins. I'm the manager at Larry's Body Shop. We are a family-owned and operated business and have been serving the North Georgia area since 1978. We are located at 1216 Progress Road in LOJ, Georgia. Our shop specializes in collision repair, and we work with all major insurance companies. Larry's Body Shop is ICAR Gold, the highest role of training recognized by the collision repair industry. It is estimated that only 10% of collision shops meet these standards. Our shop consists of state-of-the-art equipment such as laser measurement system, down-drive spray booth, spot and MIG welding equipment. All of our paints are mixed on site so that we can guarantee your paint to match every time. I know that having an accident can be a stressful event. We take pride in making sure our customers are satisfied with the repair of their vehicles. Our waiting area is clean and comfortable with free Wi-Fi and refreshing beverages. So if you're in an accident, stop by and see us at Larry's Body Shop.
Circuit World has 9-piece living room packages at incredible prices. Get this stylish sofa and love seat, 3 tables, 2 lamps, 43-inch 4K TV, and stand, all for only $1699.99 or $129.99 a month. Or get this 9-piece living room and reclining sofa and reclining love seat, now only $1999.99 or $149.99 a month. These packages are amazing. Stop in today at one of our 5 locations and get the furniture you've always wanted at Circuit World.
North Georgia Diamond is your source for diamonds in North Georgia.
Ace is your healthful place for paint and home goods, tools, outdoor living, and lawn equipment. But did you know Ace Hardware of Blue Ridge is a little bit more? We have hunting rifles and accessories for your next hunting trip. We have Amish furniture imported directly from Ohio. And we have Ace Custom Woodworks for all your custom wood project needs, from cabinets to artwork. Ace Hardware of Blue Ridge, we have your new house in stock.
What you gonna do with all that junk?
Welcome back. It is 9:44 here on a beautiful Monday morning. I'm getting a little feedback in my ear here, but I am joined today by a good friend of mine. It is Monday, January 18th. My good friend Reese Sanford's here. There's Reese. Reese serves with me on the executive committee of the Gilmer Republican Party, and he is frequent guest here on FYNTV. You know him from election night and from several op-eds he has written. His day job, he is a small business lender and what I consider an economic expert. He's my go-to guy, and he's agreed to join us. We're going to talk a little bit about the state of play economically as we enter the Biden administration, and really to talk a little bit about how we got to where we are. Reese, how are you today?
I'm excited that you announced or invited me here. How are you?
I think I've lost. Have we lost him? Yes. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks. Reese, if you can hear me, it looks like you are no longer in my meeting. Live television, folks. Reese, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up. There you are.
I can hear you.
We just need to unmute you there. Folks, if you knew what has all gone into this the last couple of days, you would laugh really hard. There he is. Okay, wonderful. All right. Where were we?
I think, Richie, we were just getting started talking. You know, as you mentioned, I work in community banking as a small business lender, and also serve with you on the Gilmer GOP Executive Committee. And we're going to talk today about kind of an intersection of those two areas, the intersection between finance and politics.
And, you know, when you look back at when the Obama administration came in 08, we were at a it was like the perfect storm of economic calamity, really, that had built up. And I know you're extremely well versed in that. So can you talk a little bit about where we were at that time when we were the last time our country went from a Republican to a Democratic administration?
Sure. So at the time that Obama took over from George W. Bush, the nation had just experienced the financial crisis of 2008, which led into the Great Recession. The financial crisis was caused by policies passed by several administrations leading up to George W. Bush. Most of these policies had good intentions, but as many times is the case, good intentions can have unintended consequences. And that's really what we saw with a lot of these policies. And it really created a perfect storm for what happened in the late 2000s. It really all began in the 1970s with the Carter administration. and the Community Reinvestment Act. Carter passed the CRA in an attempt to increase lending to low-income areas that banks were choosing not to lend to. So basically, he was going to hold banks accountable to lending in the communities they did business in. Fast forward to the Clinton administration. The Clinton administration and his HUD secretary, Andrew Cuomo, who's now a household name as the current governor of New York.
Emmy-winning governor.
That's right, Emmy-winning governor. But Clinton and Cuomo, they really wanted to vamp up the CRA. They believed that the American dream was home ownership, and they wanted to make it easier for every American to own a home. So through the CRA, they made several changes. And again, it was tending to low income and middle income households. And a lot of what they did was throw out solid underwriting practices on mortgages. Historically, you had to pay 20% down to get a mortgage. In 1995, the Clinton administration pushed this down to 3%. And by 2000, they pushed it down to 0%. They allowed no documentation loans or low documentation loans. Previously, to get a mortgage, you would have to show your employment history. They threw this out. They allowed banks to disregard low credit scores. And this really created what was called the ninja loan, NINJNA. No income, no job, no asset. So basically, people were getting mortgages for hardly any money down with no documentation that they could repay it. And what made this even more interesting was the Clinton administration basically said they were going to use the CRA to punish banks who did not make mortgages like this. So if you use prudent lending standards, the government was going to give you a bad rating on reinvesting in your community. So it really forced banks to have poor lending practices.
And then the Bush administration, if I remember correctly, kind of went along to get along with this as a way to get other policy initiatives done, and didn't really do a lot to rein it in. It was kind of a point of compromise between he and the Democrats, and then, of course, they take over Congress during his second midterm, and that bubble burst, and we have a situation in which the smaller banks, your community banks, had been granting these mortgages and then selling them up to Wall Street, and it trickles up and it creates what we now know as the recession. As the bubble bursts, it affects insurance agencies. If you could, a little bit about that and why it was so catastrophic, and why that created the situation that we had, and why that led to legislation like Dodd-Frank.
Sure. So the Bush administration, if you'll recall, I mean, a lot of his platform on the domestic economy was deregulation and cutting taxes. So it would have really been antithetical to what he was trying to do to go in and try to increase regulations on mortgages. So he just basically just left it untouched. And kind of what fueled it is you had this system that also really went back to the 70s, where banks would make a mortgage. As soon as they made it, they would sell it to Wall Street, and Wall Street would package it in a pool of other mortgages, and then they would sell it to investors. And then as far as the investment community goes, you'd have large insurance companies like AIG or other Wall Street firms that would sell derivatives against these mortgages. And, a derivative is a fancy word, and it's become a scary word post-2008. But all a derivative really is an insurance contract. But you had investors who were buying these up as just kind of a bet. They weren't really buying it because they needed the insurance for a portfolio reason. They were buying it just to bet and gamble and make money. There was credit default swaps. basically, if this pool of mortgages defaulted, you get money, and people were buying these just as an investment. But anyhow, so you had this system where banks were making mortgages, the mortgages were fully underwritten, they were selling them to Wall Street, investors were buying them, insurance companies were offering derivatives against them. So it's a whole lot bigger than just Main Street Bank, quote unquote, making a loan to Joe Smith to own a house. It's really widespread, and it connects homeowners to Wall Street to insurance companies, and it just fueled a bubble. And a lot of it just goes back to the poor underwriting standards that came about during the Clinton administration.
And then when these when you start having this domino effect of defaults on home loans, that once interest rates come up, people can no longer afford them. And when it all happens at the same time, that trickles up. And it's a quote we talked about yesterday. That famous line is, how did you go broke? Well, slowly, and then suddenly all at once. And once it hits Wall Street, we have the calamity, and it's in the middle of a presidential election of 2008, and that leads to Dodd-Frank legislation. It leads to essentially the Treasury Department, and this was actually the Bush administration, forcing Wall Street banks to merge with Main Street banks and really making it a new frontier. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a monumental moment. And then we have the Obama administration come in and really tighten up regulations, like with Dodd-Frank and with other things, to where they were afraid to lend, and that really constricted the economy.
Sure. And one thing I'll add to that is, to your point about how you go broke slowly than all at once. What really accelerated this was action the Federal Reserve took. Post 9/11, the Federal Reserve had to slash rates drastically, and they lowered rates, and they kept them low from 2002 to 2005. And at the time, a lot of these mortgages that were being made with shaky underwriting practices were being offered with floating rates or adjustable rate mortgages. And people, they would get in at a very low interest rate, and they could barely afford it then, but they were getting into a mortgage that as rates went up, their payment was going to go up. So when the Fed started increasing rates in 2006, 2007, I believe, you just had this wave of defaults, because you had these people that could marginally afford it at the starting rate. They definitely couldn't afford it at higher rates. And the banks were approving them with shaky underwriting practices, and they wanted to shift them into these floating rate mortgages because that's what Wall Street wanted to buy. So that speaks to the marriage between the two that you spoke about. They knew that Wall Street really wanted floating rate mortgages to sell to investors, so the banks were originating floating rate mortgages.
And then once everything hit the fan, they essentially forced these banks to accept taxpayer money because they had to. I know I'm sure you've read this book, Too Big to Fail, by Aaron Ross Sorkin. It's kind of the go-to on the minute-by-minute details of it. There's actually a really good movie about it, too, if you haven't seen it. About how they were forced to take it. And then when we hit the Obama administration, it was declared that the banks were to blame. And, we're running short on time here. We've got about 3 minutes left. So I want to jump ahead. And, the constriction of the economy, yes, we always hear that the Obama administration had growth every single month, but it was very slow, snail's pace. And then when Trump comes in and Republicans take over the entire government, it was like a fire hose being open. And unfettered growth, record highs in the stock market, record high confidence, which really is what caused the stock market to go up so high. It was people had confidence in the system again that they didn't have during the Obama years. So now we find ourselves with a fantastic economy, even post-COVID. And I got to wonder, with the Biden administration coming in, what is it that you expect? Will it be similar to the Bush-Biden transition, or do you think it'll be more like the Reagan-Bush into Clinton years?
Well, a lot of what Trump did to fix what Obama did was Obama had a one-size-fits-all approach to regulation. You know, if you look at Dodd-Frank and the way it governs banks, there's little differentiation between how it's going to treat a $100 million bank in a small town to how it's going to treat, a $3 trillion bank like JP Morgan Chase. And that has a disproportionate negative impact on small banks because you now have a very high cost of compliance. So a lot of what Trump did is he came in and he had a tiered approach to regulation, and is basically every bank less than $50 billion, that's really a small bank. I know it sounds like a high dollar amount, but it's small. We're going to give them less of a burden. And to me, that's just common sense. I would really hope the Biden administration would realize this and they wouldn't touch that. One thing that immediately comes to my mind that I think will impact us and all business is his proposal for the corporate income tax. Corporate income tax rates are cut from 35% to 21% under Trump. Biden's economic plan calls to increase them to 28%. People like to talk today about stakeholder capitalism, that we have to have businesses that don't just support their shareholders, but they also support their customers, their employees, their communities. I can tell you as community bankers that we are the best example of stakeholder capitalism. And taxation is not creation. That all they're doing is taking $1 out of our pocket and put it in their pocket. When it goes to them, they spend it on stuff like the ridiculous foreign aid line items we saw in the recent omnibus. When we have that money, we're sponsoring the high school football team. We're helping send the band on their annual trip. We're giving money to the local hospital to buy mammogram machines. And those are all real life examples of what my institution has done in recent years. So to me, I see that as they're taking dollars away from us that would be reinvested in our local communities. And when it goes to them, those dollars are going to be spent on Planned Parenthood. They're going to be spent on gender studies programs in Pakistan. So to me, that's one of the bigger things, that they'll be taking dollars out of our pockets and putting it in theirs. Sadly enough, Bernie Sanders and Biden actually had a task force on what they would do to the economy if he was elected. And Bernie has a lot of wish list items in there, which I don't know if how that's going to go. But one of them is postal banking. The progressive Democrats would like to turn post offices also into banking services, and every American would be given a bank account at a post office. And the goal is to help the underbanked community. Again, I feel like that is an area that community bankers do a great job of serving. If you look at where community banks are, we're often in rural areas. So again, helping lower income, middle income households. Or a lot of the community banks in metro areas are catering to certain demographics. I'll give you an example of a famous community bank in New York City. Was started by an Asian American who found that in Chinatown, the big banks were willing to take their deposits, but they weren't willing to lend to small business owners in his community. So he started a community bank in New York City to serve the Asian American community. So you have a lot of community banks like that. And I feel like when people talk of the underbanked community, usually these are the people that community banks are already serving. So my response to Bernie Sanders would be, how about you support community banks instead of trying to make the post USPS manage two completely different business models.
Well, and it makes you think, and I got to say, we are running a little over, but I got permission from BKP that we can go till 10 after. So I think this is very important to have this talk. But the other thing too is especially when you talk about predatory lending and people's own, when you enter a business deal, whether it's a loan or whatever it may be, there's a free will there where it's, two parties consenting to make that business decision. And then when the government gets involved, I mean, you can see it with the housing crisis. You can see it especially with student loans when you talk about predatory lending, and that's something we can do a whole probably hour on one day. But to think that they want to turn post offices into banking, I hadn't heard that one yet. That's very interesting, especially when you talk about predatory lending and who's really suckering who here. But would you agree, though, that the fundamentals of the economy compared to 2008 are much different and that we're in a much stronger position to withhold the storm? I think that, at least from my stance, I'm not an expert, but it seems as if Trump was able to roll back so much that it would be very difficult for the incoming administration and the incoming Congress to go all the way back to where it was. Because, I mean, it would just on paper be like, whoa, that's a lot.
Sure. It was a very different economic environment. You had, not every recession includes a banking crisis. And when Obama came in, you had a recession that was driven by a banking crisis. Today, we are having a recession. Some indicators are that we're in recovery already, but it's a K-shaped recovery. You have some segments of the economy that have bounced back, and you have others that are still languishing. Retail, live venues, they're still struggling. But there's others that have bounced back very strongly, especially in our part of Georgia. As far as the banking industry is concerned, banks are very well capitalized right now, and they're doing well. So I think it's going to be very different because our industry isn't going to be in crisis when Biden comes into office. So I do think it'll be very different this time, and banks are going to be more prepared to handle whatever may come.
Yeah, because, I mean, there's nothing like the experience that they had at the end of the last decade with the Obama administration. There's nothing like that experience to prepare you for the possibility of it happening again. And with the regulations that were put on them, all things being equal objectively, is there some of it that have helped, or is it something that is a net negative? How would you assess that?
Well, one thing I truly believe, and this goes just beyond banking, you can apply this to a lot of political discussions. We need to find happy mediums. It seems like we often have this whiplash between draconian regulations and then a very laissez-faire, almost no regulation libertarian approach. And we've got to find the happy medium. As we've already discussed in this conversation, you went from Clinton using regulation to almost force banks into reckless behavior, which is a weird type of deregulation, but that's what he did. And then you had very draconian rules under Obama. And I think what Trump did is he really made tweaks that made sense. And part of the reason that banks are so well capitalized is because of the Dodd-Frank Act and some of the good things about it. Now, some of the bad things and unintended consequences, a lot of that hit community banks. Since Dodd-Frank passed, 1,700 community banks failed. And again, we often are helping underserved areas, whether it's inner cities or rural communities. And with 1,700 of us gone, you can't tell me that doesn't hurt the underbanked community, unintended consequences. For the banks that made it, a lot of us left certain services because it became too costly to participate in them. For instance, mortgages, because that caused a lot of the financial crisis. Mortgages started to have more regulations. And, you're only charging 3 or 4% interest on a mortgage. So if it becomes a whole lot harder to originate a mortgage at the rate you can charge, you're just not netting anything. So our institution and most other small community banks no longer make mortgages in-house because we can't meet the regulatory burden. You know, we're not going to do enough volume to generate a relevant profit. So again, I think that has a consequence to communities that are less financially literate when you can't just walk into a local bank and sit face to face with someone to get a mortgage. You're now forced to go online and get a mortgage. So again, unintended consequences. It was supposed to help certain communities, and truly in the end it hurts them.
Yeah, I mean, that's with anything, frankly, and I think you're totally right about the happy medium of people being content. And, you know, you have these wild swings back and forth, and that goes across the spectrum of any issue of sudden change radically to the other side every 4 to 8 years is probably not the best way to do things. But especially economically, it's a wait and see approach. I know a lot of folks are kind of waiting to see. They've kind of minimized their risk in the market, and they're going to see what happens. I think we'll leave it at this, and it goes back to that article you sent me from CNBC, written by Larry Kudlow and Steve Moore from 2016, just to show you how much the landscape has changed. I doubt they would ever be allowed to write anything for CNBC ever again, given their support and participation within the Trump administration. But there's a quote in there that really stuck out to me about how Hillary Clinton wanted to go after Trump for predicting the 2008 market crisis, and they point out that, well, when you're able to buy low and sell high, that usually means you're a pretty smart business person. And the fact that he predicted it maybe doesn't make him a criminal. Maybe it made him a good businessman. And that's something that I was drawn to for him as a candidate. And, you know, we'll see what happens. I think those were some of the most consequential years in American history. And as the years go on, history will I think remember him much more fondly for things that he did for the economy that are lost in the haze of partisanship today. But Reese, I appreciate you joining us. Next time I co-host, I'll have you back, or next time I fill in host, I'll have you back. Love talking about this stuff with you, and I know it means a lot to our viewers as well. So thanks again.
Thank you, Richie. I enjoyed it.
And that's going to do it for us. It is a little bit after 10 o'clock. We've run a little late. And the reason we do this, well, not totally, but part of the reason is I hear that there might be a third hour coming to this show. I don't know if that's been determined officially, but I know there is what we call a trial balloon out there. And I see that we have kept our engagement here after 10 o'clock as we head to 10:15. And I don't know, should be interesting, should be fun. But with that said, it is now 10:13. I'm Richie Stone, in for BKP this morning. Brian, thank you so much for having me in. Glad to do it anytime. I know your listeners and your viewers look forward to seeing you tomorrow because he will be back. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Do something today that either as an act of service or a kind gesture or a statement about what it means to have free speech, your freedom to assemble, your freedom to demonstrate, and your freedom to speak out. Because like we said in the opening, you never want to get to a place where free speech is a matter of who gets to decide what speech is free. And I fear that's where things are going. And that's what Dr. King faced. Judges, politicians dictating what speech was free. And it's something I hope we never truly get back to again. But once again, I'm Richie signing off. Until next time I see you, have a great Monday.